There isn't a single observation that an evolutionist makes that a creationist disagrees with. So why is there any disagreement?
Operational and historical science, today on Creation Magazine Live. Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name is Cal Smith.
And I'm Richard Fangrad.
And this week we're going to be talking about no two ways about it. The difference between operational and historical science.
Okay.
You know, many times evolutionists, they always seem stupefied, right? And so why don't you creationists just accept evolution in millions of years? I mean, these are facts, you know. They rail on creationists. They say, well, you guys are ignoring the evidence, you know, that your own eyes see. You're denying science. You know, you hear these types of things after a while, and see, the problem is they've accepted certain explanations of the facts that we observed as if they were observations themselves. Like they're saying, well, we've observed millions of years. Well, no, you haven't. Yeah. You're observing facts and interpreting them that way, right?
And there are two types of science, and we've talked about this many times. There's operational science, and that has to do with making direct observations and things. You can observe things happening in the present, see the results in real time. And then there's historical science, and that's about things in the past.
Right.
And where people make guesses about what happened in the past to explain what they're observing today.
Right.
Those are two different distinctions that really need to be made. A popular version of this type of science, you'd find it on CSI or forensic science. It's not quite the same in origin science. Yeah. But it's like forensic science or Sherlock Holmes or something where you're reconstructing a past event that hasn't been observed. It's an important distinction.
Right. And a lot of times, you know, in these shows, of course, Sherlock Holmes always gets it right, doesn't he? I mean, that's the problem, right? You don't always interpret the evidence correctly. But anyway, you know, many times evolutionists have accused creationists of kind of creating this differentiation in science. They say, well, you know, there is no distinction between operational and historical science. You guys just use this as a way to, you know, cover things up and stuff. But that's easily disproven. I mean, take the example, you know, okay, what temperature does water boil at sea level? Well, it's operational science. You take a water, you stick it in, you put your thermometer in, you're going to discover what it is. Or, you know, when did Niagara Falls first form?
Well, nobody's seen it. You're heavily into historical science at that point.
Right, and the thing is, tomorrow, the temperature that water boils at sea level is going to be the same as the next day and the next day, and it has been in the past. Yep. But I mean, for example, the explanation of how long Niagara Falls took to form, that's changed many times over the years. So obviously there's a difference between operational and historical science.
Right, yeah. In the late 1800s, the great physicist William Thomson, or Lord Kelvin, most of us know him by, was saying that the Earth was between 20 and 40 million years old. Million. That was a long time ago. Yep. And of course, Kelvin hadn't measured this age, but he'd calculated it based on various factors, such, for example, his assumption was that the Earth began as a hot molten blob. And then he used that as his starting assumption, and he guessed all the details and so on, like its initial temperature and the conductivity of the heat from the inner to the outer and so on. And based on those assumptions, he calculated how long it would take this blob to cool down to its current temperature.
Right. So, but evolutionary biologists like Darwin, for example, they weren't happy with that figure that he wrote.
Yes, too
young. Because, well, it's too young. There's not enough time for evolution. Darwin actually said that Kelvin was his sorest trouble. And then he said, I require for my theoretical views a very long period before the Cambrian formation. Note what he said, for my theoretical views, I need the Earth to be older. My theory. Right?
Now, things changed once radiometric dating was discovered. Those who preferred an older Earth claimed that the heat from radioactivity, from radioactive decay deep in the Earth, that kept the Earth warmer and so on, took vastly longer for it to cool because of that. So radioactivity allowed for a different history of the Earth.
Right.
One that could extend as long as geologists, evolutionary geologists and biologists needed for evolution. Radioactivity also, of course, there's radioisotope dating, rocks and so on. Arthur Holmes, 1890 to 1965, became famous for this. In 1911, he published the first uranium-lead result and recalculated from other workers' data. His oldest age was 1,640 million, or 1.6 billion years.
Right, but these calculations were based on ignorance.
Yes.
Because in those days they didn't know about, there was two different uranium decay chains or different isotopes of uranium and lead. So actually when they got more rocks and they were dated, finally it gradually crept up to 3,000 million years, 3 billion years. So the age of the Earth has increased over time, right?
That's right.
So obviously we're not talking about an observed fact here, and we'll be back.
It has long been claimed that monkeys typing randomly could eventually type out the complete works of Shakespeare. Plymouth University researchers recently installed a computer in a monkey enclosure to see what would happen. After a month, the 6 monkeys in question had produced 5 pages of indecipherable text. This result isn't surprising though, because the monkeys mainly use the computer as a toilet and trampoline. This ridiculous research reminds me of the mathematician Sir Fred Hoyle's analogy to illustrate the likelihood of a single biopolymer necessary for life arising by chance without a creator. He likened it to 100,000 billion blind people each solving a Rubik's Cube puzzle simultaneously. And this is just one biopolymer. The simplest life forms have hundreds of biopolymers. Despite these odds, however, many people insist life arose by chance because they don't like the idea of a creator.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, today we're talking about the difference between operational and historical science. We've talked about this many times, but this is a problem area for many people, so we want to deal with it some more.
Yeah, most of the problem in defining the difference between operational and historical science comes in trying to define science itself. There isn't a real solid definition of science. It's close to that, but today evolutionists try to define science as being totally materialistic.
Right.
It's totally naturalistic. It can never involve conclusions that might end up pointing to God, something like that. And that's atheism.
Yeah.
In principle. That's
really?
Basically, atheism is what they're spouting. The materialists often define evolution as science.
Right.
And so we got these problems with definitions here, and creation as religion, so they can just ignore the issue of creation.
Right.
Of course, the founders of modern science saw no such distinction. There was no, for example, Isaac Newton, who's still hailed as the greatest scientist who ever lived.
Yep.
He didn't see that his science somehow excluded a creator, or that creation hindered his scientific research.
Right.
He was a good scientist.
Now, because both creation and evolution have to do with stories about the past, there's really no way for evolutionists to avoid the fact that their creation story isn't scientific in the empirical sense.
Right.
Right. We're all looking at empirical facts, but we're interpreting them. So it's not strictly in the realm of operational science, and you can actually look into some science literature to determine, is evolution science in the empirical sense. As a matter of fact, there was a 1995 report entitled the National Science Education Standards. This was delivered by the governing board of the National Research Council in the U.S. And this was to assist science educators in teaching what real science was and what science should contain, what it should not contain, kind of a criteria of what science is and what it should be.
Okay, cool.
And here's some of the criteria that they listed for what real science should be. They said science distinguishes itself from other ways of knowing and from other bodies of knowledge through the use of empirical standards, logical arguments, and skepticism. Scientific explanations must meet certain criteria. First and foremost, they must be consistent with experimental and observational evidence about nature and must make accurate predictions when appropriate about systems being studied. But they should also be logical, respect the rules of evidence, be open to criticism, report methods and procedures, and make knowledge public. And these explanations of how the natural world changes based on myths, personal beliefs, religious values, mystical inspiration, superstition, or the other authority, that might be personally useful and socially relevant, but they aren't scientific.
Okay, very good. Well, let's summarize this list then, and we'll see if evolution matches this criteria from this organization. So, no presuppositions. It's supposed to have observational data. include accurate information, be open to criticism, have accurate predictions, and be logical.
Okay,
That's
great.
a good summary of what you just summarized.
Sure.
There.
Well, then let's start with number one.
Yeah.
Do evolutionists have presuppositions? I think so. The National Association of Biology Teachers in 1995, they gave an official statement on what teaching evolution what evolution is.
Right.
And here's their statement. The diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution, an unsupervised, impersonal, unpredictable, and natural process of temporal descent with genetic modification that is affected by natural selection, chance, historical contingencies, and a changing environment. That's what evolution is.
So unsupervised and impersonal.
Right.
Okay.
Well, what does that do? Denies the God of the Bible.
It does. Yeah.
So obvious was that it was biased that in response to intense public pressure, they actually deleted the words unsupervised and impersonal from the statement because it's obviously biased. But the bias was there in order for it to be removed, right?
Right.
Even evolutionists like Stephen Jay Gould, he was an atheist, he didn't believe in creation or anything like that, but he was pretty honest. And he actually admitted about science, he said, our ways of learning about the world are strongly influenced by the social preconceptions and biased modes of thinking that each scientist must apply to any problem. He said the stereotype of a fully rational and objective scientific method, which with individual scientists as logical and interchangeable robots, is self-serving mythology.
So both creation and evolution are unscientific according to the standards that we just summarized.
Right.
Creation.com is the world's most powerful internet resource for finding answers to questions about the origins debate. It includes an online store where you can browse through hundreds of the world's leading creationist books, DVDs, and related materials. Scientists and researchers from around the world have contributed more than 8,000 articles, many of which have appeared in leading creationist publications over more than 30 years. Creation or evolution? When the results are in, which one is supported by scientific observations? Find out at creation.com.
Okay, this week we're talking about the difference between operational and historical science, and we're also talking about whether evolution itself meets the criteria for science according to the United States National Science Education Standards definition of that.
Okay, and we had a list there in the last segment. Well, next up on the list is observational data.
Right.
Okay, so let's get a definition of evolution and see if there is any for evolution.
Right.
For example, here's one. The theory that all living things in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form.
And obviously over millions of years. So let's think about this. Has anyone observed millions of years? No.
No.
Has anyone observed one kind of creature turning into a different kind of creature? No. I'm not talking about, by the way, butterflies becoming other kinds of butterflies,
Yes,
or bacteria.
which we agree with. And
It's speciation through natural selection, genetic mutation. We understand that, but that's not talking about one thing turning into another.
Right.
So guess what? There is no observational evidence directly that that evolution has occurred, right?
Yeah. Now, the evolutionists would complain at this point and say that, evolution takes so long that, of course, we wouldn't see it. But that's the point.
You haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it.
So it's not observational.
It's not observational, exactly.
Yeah. Now, over the years, we'd hear statements like this many times, similar to this one here. Actually, there's superabundant evidence for animals evolving under our eyes, British moss becoming darker since the Industrial Revolution, insects evolving DDT resistance, malaria parasites evolving resistance in the last 2 decades, and new strains of flu virus, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we've debunked these claims of evolution so many times that you're starting to hear less and less of these empirical proofs of evolution anymore.
It seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, because the creationists have done their work. We've been out there and made them think about it. And I'll give you an example of this kind of backpedaling. In 2008, Eugenie Scott, she's a very famous atheist in the States, and she's the director of the Evolution Promoting National Center for Science Education, which is really just an atheistic think tank.
Evolution promotion organization.
She's at Miami University, and she's giving a talk. Now, in it, she chided creationists because we prefer direct observation to inferential explanation. Well, you'd think scientists, that would be a good thing to do. And she also said, well, you guys insisting evolutionists should provide observable evidence for their belief. That's just not, Of course it is, if you're going to talk about science, right? So she actually used an example, where you can tell what happened in the past based on the evidence. And she used this trivial example of a road with some cow dung on it. And the road crew had painted a stripe, and you could see it go over the cow dung. And so she's trying to use this example as, well, we can know about the fossil record and which was buried first because, an example like this, well, obviously the cow did, and then arguing from
of
inference.
course, some things were buried first, and no issue there.
Yeah.
Well, that's obvious because it's based on what we do know, not what we don't know.
Right.
Many people have number one seen cows doing their thing, whatever. We've seen painted lines on roads, and we've seen what happens when paint, for example, is applied over a piece of tape that might be left on a wall somewhere. We understand that.
Right.
We're not. It's a bad analogy.
It's
really.
a really bad analogy. Now, to be honest, I mean, creationists have been using arguments from inference or analogy for years, right?
Right.
This is because we understand this is a historical science, not, So, for example, if you see something that has design features like a motor or a robot or something like that, well, you're going to assume there was a designer.
Oh, yeah.
If our universal experience is that whenever we see code systems or language systems, then we know it originated from an intelligent mind.
Intelligence involved, sure.
Right.
Yep.
And so if you see the same kinds of things like that in nature, if you see something like an ATP synthase motor or a kinesin or the language system of DNA, well, it's scientifically valid to come to the same conclusions. That it was an intelligent mind and it was designed, etc.
Yeah. When we see originally organic material like fossilized trees standing upright through several layers of rock, meters thick, we assume that those layers were laid down fairly quickly before the tree had time to rot. That's a standard, easy explanation. When we see unfossilized animal tissue, like we talked about several weeks ago, containing amino acid sequences with DNA and all kinds of things, within fossils of a dinosaur bone, we assume that those bones formed recently.
Right.
It's a natural, logical explanation for those things.
Exactly. So all these logical conclusions based on these analogies and inferences, they're devastating to evolutionary presuppositions. So anyway, we'll be back and we'll talk about this more in a second.
If you suffer from high blood pressure, you're certainly not alone. The incidence of high blood pressure, also known as hypertension, is on the increase. To combat this problem, doctors can prescribe several types of medication which lower blood pressure by different mechanisms. It has long been thought that black people and white people respond differently to these different drugs, so doctors were advised to consider a patient's race when choosing which medication to prescribe. But research recently published in the medical journal Hypertension has shown that this approach is flawed. Researchers found that the variation between so-called races is much less than within each racial group. So the new recommendation is that race should not be a factor in deciding which medication to prescribe. It appears that the differences between racial groups aren't that significant after all, which is what we would expect from the Bible's history and teaching.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, so we're talking about the difference between operational, historical science. We're going through this list of science standards, and what we just found is that there is no observations of evolution occurring. So I guess we can cross that one off the list.
Off the list, yes. Next on the list is accurate information.
Right.
Accurate information. And we can point to several examples where this is just...
drives me nuts, to be honest.
Yeah. And we've done this on previous shows. We've dealt with it last season, Same Old Song and Dance. You can look that up on YouTube. And got a lot of comments on that one, actually. Haeckel's forged embryo drawings.
Forged.
They're forged. It's inaccurate information. They're still in textbooks today being used to promote evolution. And you have the staged photos of the peppered moths.
Which peppered moths don't prove evolution anyway. It's just natural selection.
No.
But they were still...
The point is, it's not accurate information. Those are used to promote evolution, and there's massive problems with inaccuracy. They're being used inaccurately. They're described inaccurately, and so take that one off the list.
Yeah, because there should be an outcry from people saying,
There
right?
should be.
Yeah. Well, the next one on the list here is open to criticism. Well, I don't want to take a whole bunch of time here on this one, but you can go to our website. There are many of our articles showing how Darwinists, suppress information. They don't allow criticism of Darwinism. We've got a great book called Slaughter of the Dissidents by Dr. Jerry Bergman. And he gives complete details into many people whose careers were shattered by even questioning the concept of evolution. And we really enjoyed this. Remember we went and saw that together when it opened up in theaters? Yeah, Expelled Intelligence.
I thought it was a comedy. I thought it was hilarious.
No intelligence.
Parts of it.
Needed. Allowed. Check out this DVD. It's a great, Ben Stein did a fantastic job just exposing how people have lost their jobs for even, even the evolutionists that say, well, okay, we'll allow intelligent design to be in a paper or something. Boom, and they don't even believe in.
Next thing you know, you're working at McDonald's.
Don't question Darwinism.
What's wrong with working at McDonald's? But when you're a university prof, it's a bit of a surprise. Now, one of the biggest ways Darwinism is protected is that's the default position.
Right.
Look at this quote from immunologist S.C. Todd in a correspondence in Nature magazine. He says, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic.
How could you be open to criticism if you exclude a designer from the beginning?
Yeah, the default position is naturalism, and we're not going to allow anything else.
And so okay, we might as well just say, okay, enough of that one.
That's done.
That's
okay,
done,
yeah. It's off the list. Yeah. Let's go to Darwin himself and see how evolution.
The next one on the list.
The next one on the list.
Which is accurate predictions.
Yes, accurate predictions, right. And Darwin, we've got a quote here from Darwin that concerns this issue. Why is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory.
Okay, so here Darwin's saying that there should be a ton of these intermediate forms, right? Yes. And we haven't seen them. So what was the solution? Well, we haven't really looked at the fossil record that well, and so we're going to find them a little later on. Well, guess what? Yeah. 105 years later, we had checked the fossil record much better. And what did we find? Well, here's Stephen Jay Gould, and he said 105 years later, after Darwin, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology.
Cool.
So guess what? The prediction didn't work out. We have looked at the fossil record now. And then and 23 years after that, National Geographic had an article, Was Darwin Wrong? And in it they were talking about the fossil record. They said, illuminating but spotty. The fossil record is like a film of evolution, from which 999 out of 1,000 frames have been lost.
That's awesome.
So where's your evidence for evolution? We got one thing here, we got one thing here. All the intermediates are supposed to be there, but that part of the film isn't there. So,
amazing. How about vestigial organs? Predictions about how the appendix, for example, was useless have been proven to be wrong. Due to the faulty conclusion that we evolved from animals, and it's a leftover feature that we have in our bodies.
So they predicted we evolved from animals. That's why we've got these useless organs. They did the same thing with junk DNA. Of course, John Maddox said the failure to recognize the implications of non-coding DNA will go down as one of the biggest mistakes in the history of molecular biology. So much for that one.
Creation Magazine is a 56-page full-color family magazine that is an essential tool for anyone wanting to immunize their family against the anti-biblical worldviews bombarding us from all sides. With no paid advertising, every page is full of powerful articles, ammunition to intelligently discuss nature, history, science, the Bible, and related subjects. Although written for lay people, every effort is made to ensure the content is technically accurate so that even experts are satisfied, and young children look forward to the section written especially for them. Visit creation.com to get your subscription.
Okay, so operational historical science, and what we found out here, wow,
good one,
is that creation and evolution, they both fall into the category of historical science, right? Yeah. And we've gone through the National Science Education Standards definition of what science is. We found out that evolution doesn't meet its standards. Yeah. Well, then that's why, because it falls into the realm of historical science, not operational. It's not repeatable. It's not observable. And it's got huge holes in it. So that's why any attempt to categorize it as operational science, of course, is going to fail.
Yeah. Now, the last criteria in the National Science Education Standards was that science should be logical. I'll try to keep a straight face. But, okay, does the idea that nothing became something sound logical? Does the idea that language systems like DNA and complex codes on DNA created themselves with no mind? Is it logical to think that sophisticated machinery like kinesin or kinesin, depending on where you're from, or ATP synthase, little motors, biological motors, just formed via nothing, all by themselves with no intelligence?
Yeah. I mean, it actually takes intense indoctrination in a school system that doesn't allow anything else, mocks anything else, or just excludes it so you never even hear about it, to actually convince people that that's logical. Something came from nothing? Oh yeah, that's logical. That's not logical.
You got to go to school for a long time before you start
really
thinking
got
like
to get
that.
educated before you can start believing that stuff. So, you know, the problem is, though, most people just don't understand. They don't understand the difference between operational and historical science. So let's just have some fun here. You as the audience, you've watched the show here. Let's see, do you understand the difference now? I mean, if I said, you know, figure out what chemicals are in this solution of water, what type of science would we use? Operational or historical?
Got to be operational.
Right, because I can do the experiment in the present, I can observe the results in real time.
Yeah, and you discover that it's Coke, not water.
You got to stay awake somehow.
So, okay. What about if we said, how did the peacock get its feathers?
Well,
Operational or historical?
that'd obviously be historical.
It's
'Cause
historical.
I wasn't there
past,
when peacocks came into being.
Evolved? Was it created? We don't know. And said,
That's right.
Okay.
If I said, well, how old is this dinosaur bone? Well, you're looking at the bone. It's in your hand.
Okay, so you've got the facts.
Yes, I'm looking at
You've
a
got the
fact.
fact. You could be an evolutionist or a creationist. Doesn't
Yep,
matter. You're
there's
holding a dinosaur.
There's a bone here.
There's a bone. Look at that bone.
Yeah.
So
how old is it?
how old is it?
It's
historical science.
That's right.
Right? It's
Yeah.
not. Hopefully, this is not difficult as we go through this. It seems tremendously difficult for evolutionists.
Sometimes
to figure
you're
this
talking
out
to people,
somehow.
they just-
no. It's about science, and we're on about science, and we're gonna go where the facts take us. Well, slow down there. We can think of some other ones. How long ago did Neanderthals exist? Operational or historical? Operational or historical to determine the answer to that? It's historical.
Historical. If I said, well, how far away is the moon? Well, that's operational.
That's operational. You go and measure it.
Well, we've actually flown there.
Lasers. We've flown there.
Yeah, that's right.
Your odometer doesn't work so well, but yeah.
You know.
What did amphibians evolve from? Operational or historical?
Well, obviously, you're assuming the history of evolution, even in the question.
Even in the question.
You've
in
already
that question, yeah.
assumed the answer because you know, in a sense. How are computers made? When did God create the universe? How fast does a bullet from a .38 special travel? You know, just think about those things when you're being taught about this subject. It's very, very important. It's critical. There are two ways about it.
There are.
There is a difference between operational and historical science, and we need to understand that when we're thinking about these things. We'll see you next time.